There are two hells in war. The first is above ground, the mud, the wire, the artillery that turns men into mist, the machine guns that carve through flesh like butcher's knives, the screaming, the gas, the endless, senseless dying. The second hell is below. In the tunnels beneath no man's land, there is no artillery, no machine guns, no screaming, just silence, thick, oppressive. The kind of silence that makes you hear your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the creak of the earth settling above you, the drip of water somewhere in the dark. Down there, you are buried alive, and you pray the enemy finds you before the earth does. This is the story of a tunneling crew from the Royal Engineers. Clay kickers, they called themselves. Men who dug in silence beneath the trenches, planting tons of explosives under German positions. Men who worked in spaces so tight they had to lie on their backs and push the clay away with their feet. Men who knew that one spark, one collapse, one mistake meant death. On June 6, 1917, a crew of 8 men descended into the earth beneath Messines Ridge. Their mission was to dig a lateral shaft toward the German lines, to plant high explosives, to break the enemy's defenses from below. Only 2 of them came back, and what they brought with them was a story that never made it into the official records. A story about what they found in the dark. A story about something older than the war, older than the trenches, older than the very earth they dug through. A story about the things that should have stayed buried. The descent was always the worst part. A narrow shaft, barely 3 feet wide. Wooden supports every few meters, groaning under the weight of the earth above. A rope ladder that swayed with every step. And the darkness. Absolute. Consuming. The men climbed down in silence, one after another, each carrying a small oil lantern that cast just enough light to see the man below. The air grew colder as they descended, damper. The smell changed from cordite and rotting flesh to wet clay and stagnant water. 50 feet down, 70, 100. The shaft ended at a horizontal tunnel, barely 4 feet high. The men had to crawl on their bellies to reach the digging face. Their backs scraped the ceiling. Their knees sank into the mud. The weight of the earth pressed down on them like a fist. At the front of the line, the team leader raised his hand. The men stopped. He placed a stethoscope against the clay wall and listened. Listened for the sound of German digging, the tap, tap, tap of picks, the scrape of shovels, the muffled voices of enemy tunnelers working just meters away. Nothing, just the drip of water, the creak of timber supports, the slow, rhythmic breathing of 8 men trying not to panic. He signaled forward. They resumed digging. The work was slow, brutal, methodical. One man lay on his back on a wooden board, feet braced against the clay face. He pushed, hard. The clay broke away in chunks. Another man scooped it into a canvas bag, passed it back. The bag moved hand to hand down the tunnel like a relay. No words, no noise. Just the wet slap of clay and the rasp of breathing. Hours passed. Inches became feet. Feet became yards. The canary in its small wire cage sat at the tunnel entrance, a tiny guardian. Its job was simple: breathe. If it stopped breathing, the men ran. Poison gas, methane, carbon monoxide. The bird would die first. It always did. But the canary kept singing until it didn't. The breach happened without warning. One moment, the diggers' feet were pushing against solid clay. The next, they punched through into nothing. Empty space. A hollow. He froze. The man behind him crawled forward with a lantern, held it up to the hole. The light didn't reflect back. It just fell into darkness. Deep darkness. Darkness that seemed to swallow the light itself. The team leader crawled to the front, widened the hole with his hands, peered through. A cavern. Not a German counter-tunnel, not a natural cave. A cavern. Vast. Ancient. The walls were stone, not clay, not brick. Stone. Massive blocks fitted together without mortar. The edges were too precise, too perfect. The geometry was wrong. Angles that bent in ways that hurt to follow. Corners that seemed to fold in on themselves. And in the center of the cavern, rising from the floor like a monument, was a structure. A pillar, or an altar, covered in carvings. Symbols that predated language. Shapes that twisted and writhed in the lantern light. The stone itself seemed to pulse. Slowly, rhythmically, like something breathing. The team leader gestured. 2 men crawled through the breach, dropped down into the cavern. Their lanterns cast long, distorted shadows on the walls. And then the canary died. There was no sound, no gasp, no flutter of wings. One moment it was alive. The next, it was lying still at the bottom of its cage. Eyes open, beak slightly parted. The men in the tunnel froze. The team leader turned back toward the entrance. But before he could move, one of the men in the cavern started screaming. Not with his voice. He had no breath to scream. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He clawed at his face. His fingers dug into his cheeks. His eyes were wide, staring at something on the wall that the others couldn't see. The second man grabbed him, tried to pull him back toward the breach. But the screaming man fought, thrashed, twisted away and ran deeper into the cavern, into the dark. His lantern swung wildly, casting monstrous shadows that moved independently of his body. And then the light went out. The remaining men scrambled back into the tunnel. The team leader sealed the breach with sandbags, but it was too late. The air in the tunnel had changed. It was colder now, thicker. It tasted metallic, like blood, like rust. The lanterns began to flicker. The flames shrank, turned blue. The shadows on the walls grew longer, darker. They moved, crawled, reached toward the men with fingers that weren't there. One of the diggers started laughing, a high, broken sound. He stared at the wall, at nothing. His hands trembled. He reached out and touched the clay. And then he started digging. With his bare hands, frantically, desperately, as if trying to claw his way out, or claw his way in. The team leader grabbed him, shook him, but the man's eyes were empty, glassy, seeing something else, something beyond the clay, beyond the tunnel, beyond the world. The team leader made a decision. They had brought explosives, 60 pounds of ammonal, packed in metal canisters, meant for the German trenches, meant to collapse enemy positions, but not anymore. The team leader crawled back to the breach, tore away the sandbags, pushed the canisters through, lit the fuse. 30 seconds. He signaled. The remaining men turned and crawled. Fast. Faster than they'd ever moved. The tunnel was too narrow, too low. They scraped their backs, their knees, their elbows. The lanterns went out one by one. They crawled in complete darkness. Behind them, the fuse hissed. 20 seconds. One man panicked, tried to stand. His head hit the ceiling. Timber cracked. Clay rained down. The tunnel groaned. The team leader grabbed him, dragged him forward. 10 seconds. They reached the vertical shaft, started climbing, hand over hand. The rope ladder swayed. The earth trembled. 5 seconds. They were halfway up when the explosion hit. The sound was muffled, deep. A low, resonant thump that shook the ground like a bass drum. The shaft collapsed below them. The ladder snapped. 2 men fell, disappeared into the darkness, into the earth, into the dust. The remaining 3 climbed, clawed, pulled themselves up with bleeding hands. The walls crumbled around them. Timber splintered. Clay poured down like rain. And then, suddenly, they were at the surface. Hands reached down, pulled them out, into the light, into the noise, into the chaos of the trenches. The artillery was still firing, the machine guns still rattling. Men were still dying in the mud. Nothing had changed, except for the 3 men who crawled out of the earth. They sat in the trench, covered in clay, shaking, staring at nothing. An officer approached, asked for a report. The team leader looked up. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He said nothing. The official record lists the operation as a success. A German position was destroyed. The enemy line was breached. 60 pounds of explosives detonated as planned. But the 3 survivors never spoke about what they found beneath Messine Ridge. They never told anyone about the cavern, the altar, the carvings, the thing that waited in the dark. 2 of them were discharged before the war ended. Shell shock, the doctors said. The 3rd died in 1919. Suicide. He hanged himself in his home. They found him in the cellar, in the dark, facing the wall, scratching symbols into the stone with his fingernails. Symbols that matched the carvings in the cavern. And to this day, there are places on Messine Ridge where the grass won't grow, where the ground is cold, where men refuse to dig. Because some things are meant to stay buried. Some doors are meant to stay closed. And some evils are older than war itself. Sleep well, and remember, not all enemies wear uniforms.